Celeste Duval was 22 when her sewing box hit the wet sidewalk of Royal Street and burst open. Needles scattered between puddles, silver pins rolled under carriage wheels, the small brass scissors she had inherited from her mother slid toward the gutter. 3 minutes earlier, she had still been a seamstress inside Marchand House, one of the finest fashion shops in New Orleans. Then she had spoken up for the immigrant girls who worked 12 hours behind velvet curtains and went home with half the wages they had been promised. Victor Marchand called her ungrateful. He called her a thief. He told her no respectable shop in the city would ever hire her again. A week later, with her last coins and no safe room left to sleep in, Celeste bought a shuttered milliner shop that everyone else laughed at. The auction clerk said the roof leaked. A woman in white gloves said it was nothing but a graveyard for hats. But what nobody knew was that upstairs, behind a door swollen shut by years of rain and heat, there waited a black hatbox no one had dared to touch, and what had been hidden there would one day force New Orleans to remember the name of a woman it had tried to erase. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. If stories about the forgotten and underestimated matter to you, hit the like button and subscribe, because Celeste's story begins with a girl everyone thought they could throw away. Long before Celeste knew perfume counters and polished floors, she knew the back room. That was where her mother, Marianne Duval, bent over other women's dresses from dawn until lamplight, steaming collars, mending hems, and pulling broken seams back together with hands that never fully rested. Celeste grew up under that table. She used empty thread spools as toys and slept beside baskets of clean linen still warm from the iron. Her mother taught her to sort buttons by touch, to tell silk from rayon with her eyes closed, and to never waste a piece of ribbon long enough to tie around a finger. A good seam, Marianne used to say, doesn't ask to be praised, it just holds. Celeste believed her. She watched her mother repair torn cuffs for men who never learned her name, and let out waistlines for women who complained about the price. Marianne smiled until the door closed. Then she counted coins in a chipped saucer and wrote every debt in a little brown notebook. When fever took Marianne in a summer so hot the street stones seemed to sweat, Celeste was 16. There was no inheritance, no family house, no ring wrapped in velvet. All she had was the sewing box, the brass scissors, the brown notebook, and the lesson that a woman's hands could hold a life together, even when the world never thanked her for it. By 22, Celeste had earned a place at Marchand House, though no one there said she had earned anything at all. The shop stood behind tall windows dressed in cream silk and gold lettering. Every morning, Celeste entered through the alley door with the delivery boys and kitchen smoke. She was never meant to be seen in the front room. Her work was supposed to appear without her. She arrived before the lamps were lit. She swept loose thread from the floor, heated the iron, and lined her needles on blue cloth. Then came gowns, gloves, veils, hat trims, and frantic orders from women who wanted beauty by Saturday and did not care whose fingers bled to finish it. Celeste had a rare eye. She could look at a crooked brim and know where the wire had bent. She could feel a loose crown through fabric. When other girls guessed, Celeste measured. When they rushed, she pinned twice and cut once. Her sewing box became a small, private room she could carry. Inside, everything had its place. Needles wrapped in paper, thread wound tight, thimble, chalk, measuring tape, scissors, and her mother's notebook tucked flat under the tray. Victor Marchand noticed her skill, but never her name. A ribbon fold Celeste invented appeared in the front window under another woman's handwriting. Once, while searching for black lace in the storeroom, Celeste found an old hat wrapped in yellow tissue. It was dusty, but the stitching was finer than anything Marchand House made now. Inside the band were two faded letters, R. R. Before Celeste could look closer, Victor took the hat from her hands. "Dead stock," he said. "Trash from a dead shop." But his voice had changed when he said it. After that day, Celeste began noticing what the shop trained its girls not to see. She noticed Lucia, who came from Honduras, receiving wages short by $2 because she had spoiled thread. She noticed Anika, from Haiti, hiding needle marks under her apron. She noticed Elise crying behind stacked hat forms because her rent was due and Mr. Marchand had held back another week's pay. At first, Celeste only watched. Then she began writing things down in her mother's brown notebook. Hours worked. Wages promised. Wages paid. Names, dates, excuses. She wrote carefully, because numbers had a shape lies could not easily change. The other girls saw her doing it. Some looked grateful. Others looked frightened. "Please," Lucia whispered one night, while rain tapped the high windows. "He will send us away. He is already taking from you," Celeste said. By the next morning, chairs shifted away from Celeste. Conversation stopped when she entered the room. Even Elise could not meet her eyes. That afternoon, Victor called Celeste into his private office. "A girl with no family," he said, "should be careful how loudly she speaks." Celeste looked down at her hands. There was blue thread caught beneath one fingernail, and a needle prick had dried red at the side of her thumb. She thought of the letters inside that old hat, A, R, nearly erased but not gone. For the first time, she understood that silence was not safety. Sometimes, silence was only the room where powerful men stored what they had stolen. Celeste still believed the truth would protect her. She had not yet learned that in Marchand House, truth was the one fabric no one wanted measured. For 3 days after Victor Marchand's warning, Celeste tried to make herself smaller. She lowered her eyes when he crossed the workroom. She kept her voice even. She tied ribbons, pressed seams, trimmed veils, and told herself that a careful woman could survive if she moved quietly enough. But every time she opened her mother's brown notebook, the numbers stared back at her. Lucia had worked 72 hours in 1 week and been paid for 40. Anika had been charged for needles she never broke. Elise had lost $6 to a training deduction no one had explained. Beside each name, Celeste had written dates, hours, promised wages, paid wages. At first, the notebook had felt like a private act of kindness. Now, it felt like evidence. The workroom at Marchand House was narrow and hot, hidden behind the velvet showroom where rich women turned before mirrors and asked whether Paris was wearing feathers that season. Behind the wall, girls bent over tables until their backs ached. Steam clouded the windows. Pins flashed between fingers. Threads clung to damp wrists. The bell over the front door rang all day, but very few customers ever saw the room where their beautiful things were made. Celeste learned to read the shop by sound. Victor's polished shoes clicked sharply when he was angry. Mrs. Bellamy, the floor manager, dragged one heel when she carried bad news. The immigrant girls worked almost silently, but fear had its own sound too. A chair leg scraping too fast, a drawer closing too softly, breath held when the office door opened. On Thursday, old hat boxes arrived from storage. They were to be stripped for parts. Velvet could be reused. Buckles could be polished. Good ribbon was never thrown away. Celeste carried the boxes to the back table. Most of the hats were ordinary. Cheap felt, crushed flowers, a cracked straw bonnet with moth holes under the crown. But at the bottom of the last box, wrapped in yellowed tissue, she found a pale blue hat faded almost gray. It was damaged, but beautiful. The crown had been shaped by hand. The wire had been stitched in with almost invisible thread. The ribbon fold at the side was not just decoration. It balanced the brim so the hat would sit lightly on a woman's head. Celeste knew, the moment she held it, that no careless hand had made it. Inside the band, nearly hidden beneath a stain, were 2 faded letters. A, R. Her breath slowed. She turned the hat over gently. Beneath the lining, she felt a thickness that did not belong. With the tip of her smallest needle, she lifted one loose thread. A scrap of paper slid out, no bigger than 2 fingers. The ink was faded, but she could still read one line. Rousseau Millinari, Royal Street. Before she could read more, Mrs. Bellamy's shadow fell across the table. "What is that?" Celeste closed her hand around the paper. "Old lining." Mrs. Bellamy looked at the hat, and something uneasy crossed her face. "Mr. Marchand said those are to be stripped, nothing more." "Yes, ma'am." But Mrs. Bellamy did not leave. She watched Celeste's fingers for another moment. "Some things," the older woman said quietly, are better not picked open. Then she walked away. That sentence stayed with Celeste all afternoon. Her mother would have disagreed. Marianne Duval had picked open every bad seam before repairing it. "You cannot mend what you are afraid to look at," she used to say, bending close to the cloth. That evening, when the others were putting away their needles, Elise began to cry in the washroom. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was the kind of crying a person does when she has already learned no one is coming. Celeste found her with one hand pressed over her mouth, and the other holding a pay envelope so thin it might as well have been empty. "He said I owed for fabric," Elise whispered. "He said I ruined a sleeve last month. I did not ruin it. How much did he take?" Elise shook her head. "Please don't write it down." Celeste stopped. Rain tapped against the small window. Down the hall, someone laughed in the showroom. It was a light, careless sound, the sound of women choosing gloves, while another girl wondered whether she could still afford supper. "I can help," Celeste said. "No," Elise answered, and fear sharpened her voice. "You can get us all thrown out." The words hurt more than Celeste expected. For a moment, she saw herself as the others must have seen her. Not brave, not useful, but dangerous. A girl with no family, no husband, no savings, and no last name that meant anything in a city built on last names. A girl foolish enough to believe truth could feed people. That night, Celeste walked back to her rented room with the scrap of paper hidden inside her glove and the brown notebook under her coat. Her room was hardly wider than the bed. Rain leaked near the window, dripping into a tin cup on the floor. She lit one lamp and opened the notebook. For the first time, her hand trembled, not because she doubted the numbers, because she understood what they could cost. If she stayed silent, she might keep her work a little longer. If she spoke, she might lose everything. But the longer she looked at those names, the more Marchand House seemed less like a shop and more like a beautiful dress sewn over a wound. Celeste took out the scrap of paper and laid it beside her mother's notebook. Rousseau Millinery, Royal Street. A dead shop, a dead name, a pair of initials nearly rubbed away. She did not know then that the woman behind those initials had once faced the same kind of man, the same kind of room, and the same kind of silence. She only knew that by morning, she would have to choose what kind of seam she was willing to hold. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the city still looked washed and uncertain. Celeste arrived at Marchand House before anyone else. The alley smelled of wet brick and sour kitchen steam. Inside the workroom, the tables were empty, the irons cold, and yesterday's threads clung to the floor like little colored veins. She put her sewing box down and opened her mother's notebook. She had not slept much. All night she had thought about Elise's frightened face, Lucia counting coins with shaking fingers, Anika hiding blood spots beneath her apron, and the pale blue hat with the letters A.R. stitched inside the band. She had thought about her mother saying a good seam did not ask to be praised, it just held. But what did a seam do when the cloth itself was rotting? One by one, the girls arrived. Lucia came first. Anika followed, then Elise, pale and silent, her eyes swollen from crying. When Elise saw the notebook open on Celeste's table, she looked away. Victor Marchand entered just before 9. He was dressed in a dove-gray suit, his hair polished back, his gloves tucked beneath one arm. To the ladies in the showroom, he looked like refinement itself. To Celeste, standing in the workroom doorway, he looked like a man who had never wondered what his comfort cost. "Miss Duval," he said. "My office." The room went still. Celeste closed the notebook, but she did not leave it behind. She carried it with her. Victor's office smelled of cigar smoke, leather, and expensive cologne. Sunlight fell across framed sketches on the wall, many of them signed with the Marchand name. Celeste saw one design with a ribbon fold almost exactly like the fold she had invented months earlier. Victor shut the door. "I understand," he said, "that you have been keeping records." Celeste held the notebook against her waist. "I write down what I see. That is not your position. My position is to sew. Your position," he said softly, "is to be grateful." For a moment, neither of them moved. Outside, The bell over the front door rang as the first customers entered. Victor held out his hand. "Give me the book." "No." His face changed so quickly that Celeste understood how practiced his kindness had always been. "You are an orphaned little seamstress with no family, no standing, and no proof of anything except your own bad manners. Do you think these girls will speak for you?" Celeste did not answer. Victor opened the office door and walked into the workroom. "Ladies," he called, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Miss Duval believes there has been some injustice here." No one lifted her head. Lucia stared at her hands. Annika bent over a sleeve that did not need mending. Elise looked as if she might be sick. "Speak then," Victor said to Celeste. Celeste's throat tightened. She opened the notebook. "Lucia worked 72 hours last week," she said. "She was paid for 40. Anika was charged for supplies she did not damage. Elise had wages held for a sleeve she did not ruin. There are dates. There are amounts." Victor gave a short, cold laugh. "And there is theft." Celeste looked up. "This girl," he said, turning toward the doorway where two customers had paused, "has been seen handling private stock. Designs have gone missing from storage, old materials, old patterns. Now she invents accusations to cover herself." "That is not true," Celeste said. Victor crossed the room and snatched the notebook from her hand. Celeste reached for it, but he lifted it away and tore out several pages. The sound was small, dry, and terrible. Lucia flinched. Elise covered her mouth. Then Victor grabbed Celeste's sewing box from the table. "Mr. Marchand," Mrs. Bellamy began. He turned on her. Not a word. He carried the box through the showroom himself. Celeste followed, her face hot, her whole body hollow with disbelief. Customers stepped aside. A woman in a feathered hat watched with open curiosity. At the front door, Victor flung the sewing box onto the sidewalk. It hit the wet stone and burst open. Needles scattered. Chalk broke. Spools rolled. Her mother's brass scissors slid toward the gutter. "You are finished in this city," Victor said. "If any shop hires you, they will know exactly what kind of girl they have taken in." Celeste knelt without answering. She gathered needles from between muddy footprints. Her hands shook, but she forced them to move carefully. One needle, then another. One spool, the cracked thimble, the torn pieces of her mother's notebook. No one helped her. By noon, the first refusal came. At a dress shop 2 streets over, the owner would not even let her inside. "We heard," she said, and closed the door. At the second shop, a clerk claimed all positions were filled. At the third, a man asked whether she was the girl accused of stealing Marchand patterns. When she tried to answer, he raised one hand as if stopping a dog from entering. By dusk, Celeste had walked half the city with the sewing box pressed against her ribs. Her rented room was waiting with its own cruelty. The landlady stood in the hall, arms crossed, a key ring hanging from her belt. "Rent is due in advance now," she said. "I don't keep trouble under my roof." "I can pay part," Celeste said. "All or nothing." Celeste looked past her into the narrow room. The tin cup still sat beneath the leaking window. Her folded dress lay across the chair. But the landlady already had the key in her hand. Celeste packed before dark. She put her spare blouse, the torn notebook pages, the scrap-marked Rousseau Millinari, and the brass scissors into the sewing box. Everything else fit inside a cloth bag. That night, she slept in the back corridor of a boarding house that no longer wanted her. Gaslight leaked under the door. Somewhere above, people laughed over supper. Celeste sat with her knees drawn to her chest, the sewing box against her side like a small wooden heart. Near dawn, a newspaper slid under the front door. She woke at the sound and picked it up before anyone could step on it. On the last page, beneath advertisements for furniture, estate silver, and unpaid storage lots, one notice had been circled in pencil. County auction Royal Street property. Former milliner shop. Shuttered. Damaged. Sold as is. Minimum bid. $6. Celeste read the words twice. Royal Street. Milliner shop. $6. She took the scrap from her sewing box and laid it beside the notice. Rousseau Millinari. Royal Street. The city had closed every door she knew. But one dead shop, forgotten by nearly everyone, had just appeared like a door no one had bothered to lock. By the time the auction opened, Celeste had been awake for nearly 2 days. She washed her face in the basin of a public restroom near the market and tied her hair back with a strip of black ribbon from her sewing box. Her dress was clean but wrinkled. Her shoes were still damp from yesterday's rain. She had $6.73, 2 torn pages from her mother's notebook, and a scrap of paper that said, Rousseau Millinery, Royal Street. The auction was held in a narrow municipal room that smelled of old paper, cigar smoke, and wet umbrellas. Men stood in small groups, talking about storage lots, back taxes, and buildings no one had bothered to repair. A few women sat near the wall, fanning themselves in the thick New Orleans heat. Celeste stood at the back. No one looked at her twice until the auction clerk reached the Royal Street property. Former milliner shop, he read, adjusting his spectacles. Long shuttered. Interior condition poor. Possible roof damage. Sold as is. Minimum bid, $6. A man near the front gave a low whistle. $6 is too much, someone muttered. The clerk continued. Property has been vacant for years. No warranty of safety or contents. A woman in white gloves leaned toward her companion. That old place? It's a graveyard for hats. A few people laughed. Celeste felt the sewing box handle pressing into her palm. She thought of Victor's voice at the front door of Marchand House. Finished in this city. She thought of the landlady turning the key. She thought of the girls in the workroom lowering their eyes because fear had taught them the shape of obedience. The clerk looked over the room. Any bids? Silence. Celeste lifted her hand. The clerk blinked, as if he had not expected the bid to come from the back. $6? Yes, Celeste said. Another laugh moved through the room, soft but sharp enough to cut. The man who had whistled turned to see her. Girl, you just bought mildew with a roof. Celeste did not answer. Any higher bid? The clerk asked. No one spoke. The gavel came down. It was a small sound, but Celeste felt it through her whole body. For $6, she had bought a place everyone else thought was ruined. The papers took longer than the bidding. The clerk frowned at her coins, then at her face, then at the document, as if hoping some mistake would release him from the trouble of writing her name. But at last, he dipped his pen and filled the blank. Celeste de Duval. Her name looked strange on a property paper. Thin, slanted, almost uncertain. But it was there. When she stepped back outside, the city had turned bright after the rain. Sunlight flashed on carriage wheels. Water dripped from iron balconies. The air smelled of damp stone, river mud, coffee, and old flowers left too long in vases. Royal Street was not far, but that morning it felt like a road into another life. Celeste walked slowly, because she had nowhere else to hurry to. The sewing box knocked against her knee. In her cloth bag were her spare blouse, the torn notebook pages, the brass scissors, and the paper that had led her here. The auction deed was folded inside her bodice, close to her skin, as if warmth might make it more real. The city changed as she walked. Near Marchand House, windows gleamed. Dresses hung behind polished glass. Perfume drifted through open doors. Women in pale gloves crossed the street without looking down. Celeste kept to the edge of the sidewalk, passing the very places that had refused her the day before. Then the streets narrowed. Paint peeled from shutters. Vines climbed brick walls. The ironwork on balconies rusted red in the joints. A stray cat watched her from beneath a stoop. Somewhere, a horn played a lonely phrase and stopped before it became a song. By afternoon, clouds gathered again, low and heavy. The heat pressed down. Celeste's collar stuck to her neck. Her stomach ached with hunger, but she did not spend the 73 cents. She might need it for bread. She might need it for nails. She might need it for something she could not yet imagine. At the corner of Royal Street and a smaller lane, she stopped. The building was narrower than she expected. It stood between a closed apothecary and a house with green shutters hanging crooked from their hinges. The lower windows were covered in gray boards. The door leaned inward at the top, swollen by weather. Above it, almost hidden beneath grime and flaking paint, hung a wooden sign. Most of the letters had faded, but Celeste could still make them out. Rousseau Millinery. Her breath caught. For a moment, The street seemed to fall quiet around her. This was not just any dead shop. It was the name from the hat. The name Victor had tried to bury under the word trash. The name Mrs. Bellamy had been afraid to hear spoken aloud. Celeste stepped closer. A spiderweb trembled in the corner of the doorway. Rainwater had collected in the threshold. Someone had scratched initials into one of the boards years ago. Through a crack in the wood, she could see the dark shape of a display counter and something pale hanging from the ceiling like torn fabric. A boy passing with a basket of bread slowed down. "You buying that place?" he asked. "I already did." He stared at her, then at the sign. "My aunt says women went broke in there." Celeste looked at the faded letters again. Maybe no one let them stay rich. The boy frowned, not understanding, and walked on. Celeste took the key from the folded auction paper. It was old, dark, and heavier than it looked. Her fingers closed around it until the edge bit her skin. The door resisted her. Wood groaned. The lock stuck. She had to put her shoulder against the frame and push with both feet braced on the wet boards. For a moment, the building seemed determined to remain sealed. Then something gave. The door opened inward with a long, tired sound. Cool, stale air moved out around her, carrying the smell of dust, damp plaster, old velvet, and something faintly sweet, like dried lavender trapped in a drawer for decades. Celeste stood on the threshold. Behind her was the city that had thrown her out. Before her was a ruined shop no one wanted, dark and waiting. She lifted her sewing box, stepped over the warped threshold, and entered the only place in New Orleans that still had room for her. The first thing Celeste heard inside Rousseau Millinari was water, not rain. The storm had passed. This was a slower sound, dripping somewhere in the back of the building, one drop at a time. The shop was darker than the street. Boards covered the front windows, letting in only thin cuts of light. Dust hung in those pale lines like smoke. Celeste stood just inside the doorway with her sewing box in one hand and her cloth bag in the other, waiting for her eyes to adjust. At first, everything looked ruined. The display counter leaned toward the floor, its glass cracked from corner to corner. A mirror on the left wall had broken into 3 large pieces, each reflecting a different part of her. Damp shoes, tired face, sewing box held tight against her skirt. Empty hooks lined the back wall where hats had once been displayed. Cobwebs stretched between them like gray lace. The air smelled of damp wood, old velvet, and dried flowers gone bitter with age. Celeste stepped forward. The floor groaned. She froze, imagining the boards giving way, the whole shop swallowing her before anyone in New Orleans even noticed she was missing. But the floor settled. She breathed again and moved carefully. Near the window stood a headless mannequin draped in a torn veil. Hat stands lay tangled in the corner. Behind the counter, drawers hung open, full of chewed tissue paper, straw, and old ribbon. She had bought a building. She had not bought safety. For a moment, that truth nearly broke her. Then she remembered her mother bending over torn dresses in the laundry house. Marianne Duval never stared at the whole damage first. She found the first loose thread. She found where the fabric still held. So Celeste began with the doorway. She cleared wet leaves from the threshold, dragged a broken chair against the door so it would not swing open, and found a broom behind the counter. The handle was cracked, but usable. She swept a narrow path from the entrance to the back room. Dust rose in choking clouds. Twice she had to step outside and breathe through her sleeve. No one stopped to help. People passed along Royal Street as if the shop had remained empty. By late afternoon, she had cleared enough of the front room to see its shape. Beneath the dirt, the floorboards were dark cypress. The walls had once been cream. On the back wall, under grime, she found a strip of wallpaper printed with tiny blue flowers. She touched it with 2 fingers. Someone had chosen beauty here once. That thought steadied her. The dripping sound led her to a narrow workroom behind the shop. A long table stood in the center, buried under dust and fallen plaster. Its surface was scarred by years of blades, pins, steam, and pressure. Celeste pressed both hands on it and pushed. It did not move. The table was solid. At the far wall sat a little iron stove, black with rust but still standing. Beside, it was a box of old kindling that had somehow stayed dry under a shelf. The stove was dirty, but the pipe still reached into the ceiling, and when Celeste held a strip of paper near the draft, the paper trembled. Air still moved through it. The roof leaked in the corner by the wash basin, but one small square of floor near the interior wall was dry enough to sleep on. Small hope did not arrive like mercy. It arrived as a table that did not collapse, a stove that might burn, and a corner where rain had not yet won. Celeste worked until her arms shook. She wiped the table with rags torn from a ruined curtain. She opened drawers and found bent pins, 2 wooden hat blocks, a spool of black thread, and a bundle of green ribbon wrapped in paper. It was not enough to start a business. It was enough to remind her what a business might feel like in the hand. In one lower drawer, she found a pair of heavy shears. The handles were dark with age, but when she tested them on rotten lining, the blades closed cleanly. Celeste smiled before she could stop herself. Hope felt dangerous when a person had so little. As evening settled, the shop turned blue and quiet. She found a chipped cup in the back room and filled it from a pump in the courtyard after working the handle until brown water cleared. The water tasted of iron, but it was water. Then she counted what remained. 73 cents. A sewing box, 1 cloth bag, an auction deed with her name on it, a dry corner, a stove that might light, a table that held. Only after that did she eat the stale bread she had saved from the day before. She chewed slowly, listening to the building settle around her. Wood creaked overhead. Something scratched once inside the wall, then stopped. When the last light left the shop, Celeste tried the stove. The first match broke. The second smoked and died. The third caught on a curl of old paper and touched the kindling with a brief orange tongue. Celeste crouched before the open stove, willing the flame to stay. It bent, shrank, then found the dry edge of wood. Fire took. Not much, not enough to warm the whole room, but enough to turn the cracked mirror into 3 small windows of gold. Celeste sat back on her heels. Her face in the broken mirror looked tired and older than 22. But she was still there. Not behind Victor Marchand's curtain. Not outside a locked boarding house door. Not waiting for some employer to decide whether she deserved supper. Here, for the first time, no one could tell her to leave before morning. Before sleeping, she looked toward the narrow stair door near the back, half hidden by fallen boards and shadow. Somewhere above her was the second floor. Celeste was too tired to climb it, but as the stove clicked softly and the building breathed around her, she heard a faint shift overhead, as if old wood had moved in its sleep. By morning, she told herself, she would see what was upstairs. For now, Rousseau Millinery was broken, damp, and nearly empty. But it was hers, and for one night, that was enough. The next morning, Celeste woke to the gray-blue light of Royal Street, slipping through the bent board at the window. For a few seconds, she did not know where she was. Then, the smell of cold ash, damp wood, and old velvet returned to her, and she remembered the auction paper tucked under her bodice, the fire she had coaxed from nearly nothing, and the narrow stair door waiting in the back of the shop. Her neck ached from sleeping on folded cloth. One hip was sore from the hard floor, but no one had knocked. No one had turned a key against her. No one had told her to gather her things. That was how her second day at Rousseau Millinery began, not with comfort, but with permission to remain. She washed her face at the courtyard pump, drank water that still tasted of iron, and ate the last heel of bread. Then she tied her hair with the same black ribbon, opened her sewing box, and took out her mother's scissors. The brass was dull from years of use, but the blades still caught the morning light. The stair door resisted her more stubbornly than the front door had. A fallen shelf blocked the bottom half. Celeste moved it inch by inch, coughing as dust shook loose from the wall. The latch was swollen with age. She tried pulling. She tried lifting. Finally, she slid one blade of the scissors between the frame and the latch, not enough to damage the tool, just enough to feel where the wood had warped. "Easy," she whispered, as if she were speaking to cloth. The latch gave with a dry snap. The stairs behind it were narrow and steep, climbing into a darkness that smelled hotter and older than the room below. Celeste placed one hand on the wall and tested each step before trusting it. The boards complained under her weight, but did not break. At the top, She found a landing with a low ceiling and 2 doors. The first door opened into a small room crowded with hat stands, old tissue, hat pins, and boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. Dust lay thick on everything. The air held the faint sweetness of lavender sachets long dried out. A curtain had fallen from the window and pooled on the floor like a faded dress. Celeste stood very still. This was not storage the way Marchand House had storage. That place had hidden things carelessly, as if anything old deserved to be stripped. This room had been arranged by someone who expected to come back. Hatboxes lined the wall by size, wide ones on the bottom, narrow ones above. Some were labeled in brown ink: morning veil, garden straw, winter felt, church trim. Others had no labels at all, only ribbon tied around them with careful hands. Celeste opened the first box. Inside was a crushed hat, its feathers eaten by moths. The next held scraps of lace. The third held a brittle veil that broke when she touched it. She worked slowly, not because she expected treasure, but because old things deserved not to be handled like trash. Then she found a hat wrapped in blue tissue. Her breath caught before she even lifted it. The shape was different from the pale hat she had found at Marchand House, but the workmanship was the same. The crown had been blocked by hand. The brim wire was stitched in so finely it almost disappeared. On the left side, a ribbon fold curved upward in a quiet, elegant line. Celeste turned it over. Inside the band, hidden beneath the lining, were the letters A. R. She sat back on her heels. The room seemed to gather around her. The ruined shop below, the auction notice, the scrap from the old hat, the faded sign over the front door. None of it felt accidental anymore. These were not loose threads. They belonged to the same seam. Celeste checked the lining with the tip of her finger. There was no paper inside this one, but the stitches told their own story. They were patient, exact, done by a woman who understood balance, proportion, and dignity. Whoever A.R. had been, she had not been careless. She had not been ordinary. A sound from the street made Celeste turn. Through a crack in the shutters, she saw 2 women pause outside the shop. One pointed at the sign, the other laughed and shook her head. Their voices floated up, broken by wood and distance. "Poor girl," one said. "She'll last a week." Celeste lowered the hat into the box and closed the lid. The words stung, but not as sharply as they might have yesterday. Yesterday, the shop had been only shelter. Now, it felt like a question. Who was A.R.? Why had Victor Marchand called her work trash? And why had Mrs. Bellamy warned that some things were better not picked open? Celeste searched the rest of the room more carefully. Behind a stack of broken hat forms, she found a narrow table covered by a stained cloth. On it sat a small black hat box tied with dark ribbon. Unlike the others, it had no dust on the lid. Not clean, exactly, but less forgotten, as if someone, sometime, had touched it after everything else had been left to rot. Celeste did not open it at once. She looked around the room, at the labeled boxes, the fallen curtain, the old hat in blue tissue, the initials nearly erased but still present. Then she saw a faint line on the lid of the black box, written in ink so faded it was almost the color of shadow. She bent closer. "For the woman who refuses to bow." The words moved through her like a hand placed between her shoulders. Below, in the shop, water dripped steadily into the cracked bowl. Outside, New Orleans went on without her. But upstairs, in that sealed and breathless room, Celeste Duval placed her fingers on the knot of the ribbon and felt, for the first time, that someone from the past had known she was coming. She did not know yet what waited inside. She only knew that whatever it was, many hands had worked very hard to keep it hidden. Celeste untied the ribbon slowly. The knot had hardened with age, but it had not been tied carelessly. Whoever had closed the black hat box had wrapped the silk twice around the lid and tucked the end beneath itself, the way a woman wrapped something meant to survive dust, weather, and the wrong hands. The ribbon finally loosened. Celeste lifted the lid. Inside lay tissue paper, cream-colored once, now browned at the edges. Beneath it were a journal bound in dark green cloth, folded sketches, several envelopes, and a small packet wrapped in muslin. On top of the journal rested a single pearl-headed hat pin, yellowed with time. Celeste did not reach for the money first, though she saw the shape of it inside the muslin. Her hand went to the journal. The first page cracked softly when she opened it. "My name is Amélie Rousseau." The letters were firm and slanted, written by someone who had learned to make even ink stand straight. Celeste sat down on the floorboards. Dust clung to her skirt. Light came through the shutter in one thin bar across her hands. She kept reading. Amélie had opened the shop when she was 29, after years of sewing for other people's names. She had learned millinery from her aunt, who made hats for church singers, widows, brides, and women who had only one good dress, but still wanted to walk into Sunday with dignity. Amélie wrote about painting the walls cream. She wrote about choosing blue flower wallpaper because no woman who worked with her hands should have to stare at bare plaster all day. Celeste remembered the faded blue flowers downstairs. The journal shook slightly in her lap. Between orders, measurements, and material costs were sentences that felt written for her. A woman should not have to ask permission to build a room where her work is respected. Celeste touched the line with one finger. Then she found the name Marchand, not Victor. Victor had not been born yet. The name in Amélie's journal was Etienne Marchand, grandfather to the man who had thrown Celeste's sewing box into the street. Amélie wrote that Etienne first came as a customer, then as a flatterer, then as a buyer who wanted her patterns. When she refused to sell them outright, he offered partnership. When she refused that too, orders began disappearing. Clients canceled. Suppliers demanded payment early. Rumors spread that Rousseau Millinery copied designs and used cheap materials. Celeste's stomach tightened. It was the same cruelty, only older. Halfway through the journal, she found a line stained by water but still readable. "If they can convince the city a woman stole what her own hands made, they do not need to steal the shop. The shop will starve." Celeste closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she reached for the folded sketches. There were dozens. Wedding hats, morning hats, garden hats, travel hats, church hats. Each page carried Amélie's small mark, A.R. Then Celeste saw the ribbon fold. Her ribbon fold, not exactly the same, but close enough that her skin went cold. Marchand House had built a new window display around that fold months ago. Victor had praised the Marchand eye, while Celeste stood behind a curtain with thread cuts on her fingers. But here was the shape, drawn 30 years earlier by Amélie Rousseau. Celeste understood then that Victor had not only stolen from her. His family had been stealing from women like her long before she was born. She opened the muslin packet last. Inside was money. Old bills, some worn soft at the creases, others crisp enough to whisper. There were coins too, wrapped in paper rolls, and a bank receipt dated years before the shop closed. It was not a fortune like the rich meant fortune. It would not buy a mansion. It would not buy safety forever. But it was enough. Enough to repair the front glass. Enough to pay for a city permit. Enough to buy straw braid, buckram, wire, lining, thread, and ribbon. Enough to eat while she worked. Enough to reopen one room without begging any man for wages. In the bottom of the hatbox, beneath the sketches, was one envelope sealed with dark wax. On the front, Amélie had written, "To the woman who finds this when she has nowhere else to stand." Celeste opened it. Amélie wrote that she did not know whether the next woman would be young or old, married or alone, rich in friends or poor in every visible way. She only knew the shop must not be left to rot in the hands of the men who had tried to bury it. "The money is not charity," she wrote. "It is seed. Use it only if you intend to build something that bears your name." Celeste swallowed hard. The letter continued, "Do not sell the designs to a house that will remove the hand that drew them. Do not let them call you difficult for keeping what is yours. If you can open the door again, open it for another woman too." Celeste bent over the page until her forehead nearly touched the paper. All her life, she had inherited things that proved poverty. A worn sewing box, brass scissors, a notebook full of debts, the habit of counting coins before bread. Now, In a room forgotten by nearly everyone, she had inherited something else. Not just money, permission, responsibility. A woman's trust. She found a stack of customer cards tied with string. Some names were rich, some were ordinary. Some had notes beside them. Pays slowly, but always pays. Widowed, make brim lighter, likes blue, never charge full price. Amélie had known her customers as people, not purses. Then Celeste saw something tucked into the journal's back cover. It was a label, unused and still bright, where the paper had been protected from air. Rousseau Millinery, Royal Street, made by hand. Below it, in pencil, Amélie had written, "If you continue the work, add your name. Do not disappear yourself to honor me." Celeste stared at the words. She thought of Marchand House. The curtains, the hidden workroom, the designs signed by men who had never pricked their fingers to finish them. She thought of Lucia, Anika, and Elise. She thought of the old hat Victor had called trash. A different heat rose in her chest now. Not anger alone. Direction. She closed the journal, wrapped the money again, and placed the sketches back in order. Then she took one of Amélie's blank labels and set it beside a clean page from her mother's notebook. Her hand trembled when she wrote, but she did not stop. Rousseau Millinery, restored by Celeste Duval. Downstairs, the building still leaked. The windows were still boarded. Victor Marchand still owned the shop, people praised. The girls at Marchand House were still afraid. Nothing had been solved. And yet everything had changed. Because Celeste had opened a box the city had forgotten, and inside it, she had found the three things Victor Marchand had spent his life taking from women. Proof of the hand, means to begin, and a name that refused to stay buried. The first thing Celeste bought with Amélie Rousseau's money was not silk. It was glass. She stood at the glazier's counter the next morning with her old sewing box under one arm and a folded bill in her glove. The man behind the counter looked at her dress, then at the money, then at her face. Celeste had learned that look. It was the look people gave a woman when they were trying to decide whether her money had a man behind it. "For the front window of Rousseau Millinery," she said. The glazier raised his eyebrows. "That place?" "Yes. You sure it's worth repairing?" Celeste laid the money on the counter. "The glass does not have to believe in the shop. It only has to fit the frame." By evening, the cracked window had been measured. By the next afternoon, a new pane stood in the front of the shop, still wavy in the old way, catching the street in soft distortions. Celeste cleaned the display counter until her hands smelled of vinegar and dust. She washed the blue flower wallpaper gently with a damp cloth. She scrubbed the sign outside until the letters Rousseau Millinery could be read without squinting. Then she made one hat, not one of Amélie's grand designs. Not yet. Celeste was too wise to spend all her courage in one afternoon. She chose a simple straw base from the upstairs room, cleaned it, reshaped the brim over steam, and added a dark green ribbon from the drawer below. Inside the band, she stitched one of the new labels by hand. Rousseau Millinery, restored by Celeste Duval. When she placed it in the front window, people slowed down. Some smiled. Some frowned. A few crossed the street to look closer. By sunset, the rumor had begun. It moved faster than Celeste could sweep. It passed from a delivery boy to a grocer, from the grocer to a woman buying coffee, from that woman to a maid who worked for a Marchand customer. By the next morning, people were saying the orphan seamstress had found money in the dead hat shop. Others said she had found jewels. One man claimed there had been gold sewn into old bonnets. By noon, the story had grown teeth. At 3 o'clock, Victor Marchand walked through her door. Celeste was behind the work table, trimming a brim. She heard the bell and looked up. Victor removed his hat, as if entering a parlor he owned. His gaze traveled over the clean counter, the repaired glass, the hat in the window, the swept floor, and finally Celeste's face. "Miss Duval," he said, "you have been busy." Celeste set down her needle. "Mr. Marchand," he smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "I heard you had taken pity on this old place. I bought it, so I understand." He touched the edge of the display counter with one gloved finger, then looked at the dust it left behind. "Ambitious. Celeste said nothing. Victor walked toward the window and examined the hat. For the first time since she had known him, he did not look amused. He looked careful. "Where did you get this ribbon fold?" "I made it." "No," he said softly. "That is not what I asked." The room seemed to tighten. Celeste felt the journal hidden beneath a loose board under the work table. She had moved it there at dawn, wrapped in oilcloth, along with the sketches, the customer cards, and most of the money. She had copied 3 pages in her mother's notebook and placed the copies elsewhere. A woman who had seen Victor tear paper once did not leave truth in one place. "I learned my trade honestly," she said. Victor turned from the window. "Did you?" He reached into his coat and unfolded a paper. "Your ownership is very recent. Your permits, I imagine, are not. Buildings abandoned this long often require inspection. Fire clearance, commercial approval, tax confirmation. I will file what is required." "With what experience? With what backing?" His voice stayed polite. "Celeste, you are very young. This building is unsafe. This neighborhood is unkind to girls alone. I am prepared to make you a fair offer." "No." He blinked. "Once. You have not heard the amount." "I heard the word offer." Victor's mouth thinned. "Do not mistake stubbornness for dignity." Celeste picked up her needle again. "Do not mistake hunger for consent." For a moment, he looked as if he might strike the table. Instead, he put on his hat. "You were dismissed from my shop under serious concerns," he said. "If you begin trading in designs that belong to others, I will protect my house." After he left, Celeste stood very still until the bell stopped trembling. The next day, the city clerk told her the permit office had misplaced one form. The day after that, a supplier refused to sell buckram on credit, though he had given credit to half the shops in the quarter. 2 women entered, admired the hat in the window, and left quickly when one whispered that Celeste had stolen from Marchand House. On the 4th night, a stone came through the new glass. Celeste woke from the floor upstairs to the sound of shattering. She ran down with her brass scissors in one hand and found the front window broken inward, moonlight lying over the shards. The hat she had made was on the floor, its brim bent, its green ribbon dirtied by glass dust. For one terrible minute, she could not move. The pain had cost money. The ribbon had cost time. The window had been the first proof that the shop could look alive again. She knelt and picked up the hat. The brim was not ruined. Bent, yes. Dirtied, yes. But not ruined. Celeste carried it to the work table, brushed away the glass, and set water to boil on the stove. Steam softened the straw. Her fingers worked slowly, pressing the shape back, coaxing the brim into its old line. By dawn, the hat stood again, imperfect but proud. She placed it not in the broken window, but on the table where anyone who stepped inside would see it. Then she swept the glass. Each stroke of the broom made her angrier, but not wild. It made her precise. When the sun rose, Mrs. Bellamy appeared outside the broken window. The floor manager looked older in morning light, smaller without the authority of Marchand House around her. She held a parcel, wrapped in brown paper. "I was not here," she said. Celeste looked at her. Mrs. Bellamy slipped the parcel through the gap where the pain had been. "Pages," she whispered. "From old order books. I should have burned them years ago." Celeste did not reach for it at once. "Why bring them now?" Mrs. Bellamy's eyes moved toward the street. "Because I watched your mother sew cuffs for my husband when he was sick and never charge full price. Because I watched Amélie Rousseau lose everything while I kept my position. Because sometimes being careful turns into being ashamed." Before Celeste could answer, the older woman stepped away. Inside the parcel were brittle invoices, customer notes, and copied sketches from decades earlier. Several bore the Marchand stamp. Several matched Amélie's drawings. Celeste sat at the work table while sunlight entered through the broken glass. For the first time, she understood that danger was not proof she should stop. Danger was proof she had touched the right seam. But Victor Marchand had money, friends, permits, gossip, and men willing to throw stones in the dark. Celeste had a broken window, a hidden journal, a damaged hat, and a name newly stitched into the band. She placed Mrs. Bellamy's pages beside Amélie's copied sketches and locked both inside the iron stove until she could find a safer place. Then she took out a fresh needle. There would be no open sign that day. No customers. No victory. Only work. And in that ruined shop on Royal Street, with glass still glittering under the counter, Celeste Duval bent over the repaired hat and began stitching the green ribbon back by hand. By the second morning after the window broke, Celeste understood that a secret was not safe simply because it was hidden. The journal under the floorboard could be found. The copied sketches in the stove could burn. Mrs. Bellamy's invoices could disappear as easily as Victor had torn pages from her mother's notebook. A woman alone could hold truth for a while. But if no one else knew where to look, truth could still be buried with her. So Celeste went searching for the name Amélie had written near the back of the journal. Odette Lemaire. The entry was old, dated almost 30 years earlier. Odette stayed after everyone else left. She saw him take the blue garden design. She told me to fight. Then she cried because she had children to feed and could not stand beside me. I do not blame her. Hunger has made cowards of better women than either of us. Celeste read the line 3 times before folding the page copy into her glove. It took half a day to find the woman. A baker remembered an Odette who once hemmed altar cloths. A flower seller said she lived near Street Anne's, in a narrow house with green shutters and a cracked statue of the Virgin in the courtyard. Celeste found the place just as afternoon rain began to darken the brick. Madame Odette opened the door only a few inches. She was small, thin, and nearly 80, with silver hair pinned close to her head and eyes still sharp enough to cut thread. Her hands were bent with age, but Celeste noticed at once how cleanly her cuffs had been mended. I don't buy, Odette said. I'm not selling. I don't give to charity either. I'm not asking. The old woman's eyes narrowed. Then what do you want? Celeste took the copied journal page from her glove. I found this in Rousseau Millinery. At the name, Madame Odette's face changed. Not much. Only enough for Celeste to see that the past had not gone anywhere. It had merely been sitting behind the old woman's eyes, waiting. Who are you? Odette asked. Celeste Duval. I bought the shop. No one buys that shop unless she has nowhere else to go. That may be true. Odette opened the door a little wider. Inside, the house smelled of starch, old wood, and chicory coffee. A sewing basket sat beside a chair near the window. On the wall hung a faded photograph of 3 young women standing outside a shop. One held a hatbox. One laughed at something beyond the frame. The third looked straight at the camera, with calm, proud eyes. Celeste knew her before Odette spoke. That was Amélie, the old woman said. Celeste sat at the table, while rain tapped the courtyard leaves. She showed Odette the label, the copied sketches, and one of Mrs. Bellamy's invoices. Odette touched nothing at first. Then, she laid one bent finger on the initials A, R, and closed her eyes. I should have spoken, she said. Celeste did not answer too quickly. She wrote that you stayed. I stayed in the room, Odette said. Not in the fight. Piece by piece, the story came. Amélie Rousseau had been the finest milliner on Royal Street. Not because she dressed the richest women, though she did that too, but because she understood what a hat could do for a woman who had little else. She made mourning hats that did not make grief ugly. She made church hats for women who paid in coins. She made wedding veils for brides whose families wanted something beautiful without being cruelly expensive. Then Etienne Marchand began sending buyers. First, he wanted patterns. Then he wanted exclusive rights. Then he wanted Amélie to close her own shop and work under his house name. She refused, Odette said, very politely. That made him angrier than if she had shouted. After that, suppliers changed their terms. Customers repeated rumors they pretended not to believe. A set of designs disappeared from Amélie's workroom and appeared months later in a Marchand window. When Amélie accused him, he accused her first. People believe the larger sign, Odette whispered. That is the shame of cities. Celeste looked down at her hands. I need someone who remembers, she said. Odette's mouth tightened. Remembering is not the same as standing in public. No, Celeste said, but it is where standing begins. For a long moment, only the rain spoke. Then Odette rose slowly and went to a cabinet. From behind folded linen, she removed a paper packet tied with thread. Inside were 2 old receipts, 1 photograph, and a torn invitation to a private showing at Marchand House. On the back of the invitation, in faded pencil, someone had sketched Amélie's blue garden hat. "I kept these," Odette said. Not bravely, just secretly. Secretly is better than gone. The old woman looked at Celeste then, really looked at her. "You have her stubbornness. I never met her. Stubbornness travels without introduction." Celeste almost smiled. Before she left, Odette gave her more than papers. She gave instruction: how to steam straw without making it brittle, how to curve wire so the brim rested lightly, how to hide strength inside softness, how to mark each finished piece where no man could cut the maker's name away without damaging the hat itself. "Do not make copies of Amélie," Odette said. "Continue her." That sentence followed Celeste back through the wet streets. Over the next week, the shop changed by inches. Mrs. Bellamy came once at dawn and left a packet of thread by the door. Lucia arrived after dark with 2 lengths of discarded lining hidden beneath her shawl. Anika brought a customer quietly, a widow who needed a plain black hat and had no wish to enter Marchand House. Elise came last, trembling, and asked if Celeste could teach her to shape ribbon. "I can pay very little," Celeste said. Elise looked at the broken window, the swept floor, the work table, the hat blocks waiting in a row. "Little is more than nothing," she said. "And you will say it is mine when I make it?" Celeste held her gaze. Yes. So the shop began with no open sign, no polished floor, and no certainty. It began with women entering by the side door, with coins counted honestly, with names written beside work, with Madame Odette seated near the window once a week, correcting the angle of a brim with a sound of disapproval sharp enough to make everyone stand straighter. Celeste still made every final decision. She chose which designs could be restored. She chose where the money went. She chose not to sell to Victor. But she was no longer alone in a room full of evidence. Rousseau Millinery had begun to breathe again. Not loudly, not safely, but together. The confrontation did not begin in a courtroom. It began with a hat in a window. 3 weeks after the stone broke the glass, Rousseau Millinery had a new pane, a swept floor, and 6 finished hats placed carefully along the display shelf. Each one carried a label stitched deep into the inner band, where removing the name would damage the work itself. Rousseau Millinery. Restored by Celeste Duval. A widow bought the first black hat. A choir singer bought the second. A young bride came with her mother and left crying quietly. Not because the veil was expensive, but because Celeste had made it beautiful without making the girl feel poor. By then, Victor Marchand had stopped smiling. His new collection was announced on cream-colored cards delivered across New Orleans. The event would be held at the Marchand House showroom, with members of the Fashion Guild, old customers, and women whose names opened doors. The collection was called Heritage in Bloom. Celeste learned of it from Anika, who came through the side door after dark. "He is using them," Anika said. Celeste looked up from the brim she was wiring. "Using what?" "The old shapes. The blue garden one. The mourning veil with the lifted side. The travel hat with the low pin. He says they are Marchand family designs." Madame Odette went still. Celeste did not speak at once. She wiped her hands and went upstairs. When she returned, she carried Amélie's journal, copied sketches, Mrs. Bellamy's invoices, and Odette's old photograph. There was anger in her, but it did not scatter. It arranged itself. "We will not shout from the street," she said. "We will bring the stitches where they can be seen." The next 2 days passed in disciplined quiet. Celeste restored the pale blue garden hat from upstairs as carefully as if Amélie herself might inspect it. Odette helped reshape the flowers. Elise stitched the lining. Lucia pressed the ribbon. Anika copied dates from invoices into a clean hand. Mrs. Bellamy came at dawn with the final piece. An old Marchand order sheet showing a new design entered 3 months after the same design appeared in Amélie's customer book. "He will say I am lying," Mrs. Bellamy whispered. "Then we will let the dates speak first," Celeste said. The Fashion Guild meeting took place in a long room above a tea house near the river. It smelled of polished wood, hot tea, perfume, and rain-damp gloves. At the front, Victor Marchand displayed his new hats on tall stands under soft lamps. Celeste entered through the back. She wore her plain dark dress, cleaned and pressed. Her hair was pinned simply. In her hands, she carried a hatbox. Odette walked beside her with a cane. Elise, Lucia, and Anika followed with folders tied in string. People turned. Whispers moved across the room. Victor saw her and smiled, as if she had arrived exactly where he wanted her. Poor, young, unsupported, and easy to dismiss. "Miss Duval," he said, "this is a private presentation." Celeste walked forward until she stood before the blue garden hat with the folded ribbon. "I know," she said. "That is why I brought the woman who designed it." A murmur rose. Victor laughed lightly. "You brought a ghost?" "No," Celeste said. "I brought her work." She opened the hat box and lifted out Amélie's restored blue hat. The room quieted. Even under age and repair, the hat had a grace. Victor's new version did not. His was brighter. Amélie's was better. The difference could be felt before it was explained. Victor's eyes hardened. An old piece from a dead shop proves nothing. Celeste opened the first folder. This is Amélie Rousseau's sketch, dated 32 years ago. This is her customer card. This is the invoice for the same design. And this is a Marchand order sheet, entering that design 3 months later under another name. A guildwoman in navy leaned forward. "May I see?" Victor stepped toward the table. "These papers are meaningless without authentication." Madame Odette's cane struck the floor once. "I was there," she said. Every head turned. Victor's smile thinned. "Madame Lemaire is elderly. Memory is a delicate instrument. So is a needle," Odette said. "But in steady hands, it still pierces." Celeste opened the journal to the marked page. Amélie wrote the day the design disappeared. She wrote the supplier who suddenly demanded early payment. She wrote the customers who canceled after visiting Marchand House. Those same names appear later in your family books. Victor's voice sharpened. "You are a dismissed employee with a grudge." "Yes," Celeste said. "I was dismissed after keeping records of unpaid wages." A louder murmur moved through the room. Victor turned to the guild chairwoman. "This is slander." Celeste looked at him, then at the women seated before her. "You may question my education. You may question my poverty. You may question whether a girl with no family should stand in this room. But you cannot change the stitches." She took Victor's blue hat from the stand and turned the brim toward the lamps. "This wire is machine set. It is too stiff at the left curve. That is why the ribbon pulls." Then she held up Amélie's hat. "This one was shaped by hand. The fold is not decoration. It carries the weight of the brim. That was Amélie Rousseau's method. Anyone here who knows millinery can see the difference between copying a shape and understanding why it lives." The chairwoman rose and examined both hats in silence. Another older customer followed. Then another. One woman touched Amélie's ribbon and covered her mouth. "My mother had a hat like this," she whispered. "She said a woman on Royal Street made it." "Not Marchand." Victor's face flushed. "Sentiment is not evidence." "No," Celeste said. "But dated paper is." Elise placed the copied order lists on the table. Lucia added the wage notes. Anika added the invoices. Then Mrs. Bellamy, trembling near the doorway, stepped forward. "I handled some of those books," she said, "for Marchand House. Some designs were not theirs." Victor turned on her. "Careful." Mrs. Bellamy flinched, but did not step back. "I was careful for 30 years, she said. "That is why this happened." The room went silent in a different way then. Celeste opened the last folder. "These designs belong to Amélie Rousseau's record," she said. "Rousseau Millinery will sell them under Amélie's name and mine. No other house has the right to remove either." Victor gave a cold smile. "And who will enforce that?" "You?" Celeste met his eyes. "Yes." The word was quiet, but it did not bend. The guild chairwoman looked from the sketches to the hats, then to Victor. "Until this matter is reviewed," she said, "Marchand House will withdraw the Heritage in Bloom collection from guild endorsement." Victor's expression cracked. "You would believe her over me?" The chairwoman glanced at Amélie's hat. "I believe dates. I believe records." and I believe workmanship, when it is placed in front of me. Celeste gathered the journal. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Victor stepped close enough that only she could hear him. "You think this makes you safe?" "No," Celeste said. "I think it makes me named." She walked out with Odette beside her, and the others behind her. No one cheered. No one needed to. Behind them, the Marchand name had not fallen completely. Names like that rarely fell in one afternoon, but for the first time, it had been made to answer. And on Royal Street, in a shop once called Dead, Celeste knew the door would open the next morning under her own hand. Victory did not arrive the next morning. It arrived in small, stubborn pieces. First, there was the silence from Marchand House. No new cream-colored cards appeared in the homes of wealthy customers. No glowing announcement praised heritage in bloom. The hats that had stood under soft lamps in the guild room vanished from the front window before noon. Then came the cancellations. Not all of them. Powerful houses rarely emptied in a day. Some customers stayed because they preferred comfort over conscience. Some pretended not to know. Some said every family business had old complications. But 3 women who had once bought from Marchand House came quietly to Royal Street. The first was Mrs. Davenport's daughter, now gray-haired herself. She brought an old hat wrapped in tissue, one Amélie had made for her mother. "My mother said no one ever shaped a brim like Madame Rousseau," she told Celeste. "I thought she was only being sentimental." Celeste placed the old hat on the work table and turned it toward the light. "No," she said. She was being accurate. The woman ordered a new garden hat before leaving. The second customer was a church singer from Tremé, who said her aunt had worn Rousseau hats every Easter until the shop closed. The third was a bride whose mother refused to let Marchand House profit from stolen work. Within a week, Celeste had more orders than she could finish alone. She paid Lucia for 4 afternoons of stitching. She paid Anika for lining work. She paid Elise for ribbon shaping. Not promises, not favors, not deductions written in someone else's book. Coins in hand, names written beside work. Madame Odette watched from the window chair, pretending not to cry when Elise finished her first clean ribbon fold. Mrs. Bellamy came once with a ledger of old Marchand supplier accounts and left without staying for coffee. But before she went, she touched the doorframe as if asking forgiveness from the building itself. The guild's review took longer. There were letters. There were meetings. There were men who argued that dead women could not own designs. There were women who answered that living men should not profit from theft. Celeste attended only when necessary. She did not beg. She brought documents, hats, labels, sketches, and stitches. At last, the guild issued its decision. The restored Rousseau designs would be recognized under the name Rousseau Millinery, with Celeste Duval listed as the authorized restorer and maker. Marchand House would receive no endorsement for any design matching Amélie's records. A public notice would be printed in the city paper. Celeste read the notice standing behind her counter. Her name looked different in print. Not like a rumor, not like an accusation, like a fact. 2 days later, Victor Marchand came again. This time he did not remove his hat. The bell over the door rang once, then trembled into silence. The shop was busy but calm. Lucia sat near the side table sewing lining into a morning hat. Elise steamed ribbon over a kettle. Annika sorted customer cards. Odette looked up from her chair with the expression of a woman who had waited 30 years to be rude if necessary. Victor placed a folded paper on Celeste's counter. "An offer," he said. Celeste did not touch it. "It is generous," he added. "More than this narrow old building is worth. You could leave New Orleans, start somewhere quieter, avoid further difficulty." Celeste looked around the shop. The new glass held the afternoon light. The blue flower wallpaper still showed stains, but it no longer looked ashamed of them. On the display shelf sat 6 finished hats, each different, each carrying its maker's name, where no one could remove it without leaving damage. "No," Celeste said. Victor's jaw tightened. "You have no idea how hard it is to keep a business alive. I am learning. You think sentiment will pay rent?" "No," she said. "Work will." He leaned closer. "You are making an enemy you cannot afford." Celeste finally picked up the folded offer. She opened it, read the number, and felt the room grow very still around her. It was more money than she had ever seen promised to her name. Enough to buy safety, at least for a while. Enough to disappear. She thought of Amélie's letter. The money is not charity. It is seed. She folded Victor's offer once, then twice, and handed it back. This shop is not for sale. Victor stared at her. And the Rousseau line, Celeste continued, will go out under Amélie's name and mine. His face reddened. You are nothing without what you found. Celeste looked at him steadily. No, she said. I am the one who stayed long enough to find it. Victor left without another word. No applause followed him. No dramatic justice came down like thunder. But the next morning, the newspaper printed the guild notice. By noon, Royal Street had a line outside a shop people once crossed the street to laugh at. Celeste did not stand in the doorway to admire it. She stood at the work table, sleeves rolled, needle in hand, finishing the first official piece of the Rousseau line. Inside the band, she stitched two names, Amélie Rousseau, Celeste de Duval. Then, beneath them, in smaller thread, she added one more line, made by women paid for their work. The first morning, Celeste opened Rousseau Millinery with a full window display. She arrived before the street had finished waking. The air still held the coolness of night. Rainwater clung to the iron balconies. A milk wagon rattled past with a tired horse, and somewhere down the lane a woman swept her front step in slow, steady strokes. New Orleans smelled of wet brick, coffee, river wind, and the faint sweetness of flowers bruised by yesterday's heat. Celeste unlocked the door herself. For a moment, she did not go in. She stood beneath the restored sign and looked at the letters. Not new letters, not perfect ones. She had chosen not to repaint them until they looked untouched by time. The name Rousseau Millinery still carried scratches, weather stains, and the ghost of old neglect. But now the letters could be read clearly from the street. That was enough. Inside, the shop was quiet. The new glass held the pale morning light. The blue flower wallpaper had been cleaned but not hidden. The work table stood in the center of the back room, no longer buried under plaster and dust, but marked with fresh chalk lines, ribbon scraps, hat blocks, and a row of needles set neatly on cloth. Celeste crossed to the stove and touched its iron door. Cold, solid, familiar now. She remembered the first night, when one small flame had seemed almost impossible. She remembered stale bread, broken glass, the sound of water dripping into a cracked bowl. She remembered sleeping on the floor with the deed tucked close to her heart, because paper had been the only proof that no one could throw her out before morning. Now there was a narrow bed upstairs. Not much. A mattress, a quilt from Madame Odette, a washstand, a candle, and a hook for her dress. But the room was hers. The floorboards had been swept. The window opened. On the sill sat a small clay pot with basil growing in it, brought by Lucia, who said every proper workroom needed something green. Celeste went upstairs before the others arrived. The room that had held the black hatbox no longer felt sealed. Hatboxes still lined the walls, but now each one was labeled, cleaned, and protected from damp. Amélie's journal rested in a glass case near the window, not as a relic to be worshipped, but as a witness. Beside it lay a new ledger with cream pages. Celeste opened it to the first blank sheet. She wrote carefully, Rousseau Millinery Workers and Makers. Under that, she wrote her own name first, not because she mattered more, but because she had spent too many years letting other people place her last. Celeste Duval Milliner. Restorer. Owner. Then she wrote the others. Lucia Alvarez, lining and hand finishing. Anika Baptiste, customer cards and trim work. Elise Moreau, ribbon shaping. Odette Lemaire, senior advisor and teacher. Mrs. Bellamy, records and repair accounts. She paused after the last name. Mrs. Bellamy had asked not to be written down yet. Shame still made her careful. But Celeste had learned that being unnamed was one of the oldest ways a woman disappeared. So she wrote it anyway. Gently, in pencil. Downstairs, the bell rang. Lucia arrived first, carrying bread wrapped in cloth. Anika came next with a stack of clean order cards. Elise entered with cheeks pink from hurrying, then stopped in front of the window to look at the display as if she had never seen it before. Madame Odette arrived last, leaning on her cane and pretending the stairs had not offended her. "You place the garden hat too near the sun," she said. "Good morning to you too," Celeste answered. Odette sniffed, but her mouth softened. They worked through the morning in a rhythm no one had commanded. Steam rose, thread moved, scissors opened and closed. Customers came and went. Some were wealthy, some were not. A widow paid in coins. A bride paid half now and half later. A church singer laughed when Elise showed her a ribbon color bold enough to make the whole room look up. At noon, Celeste placed a small sign near the counter. Custom work by appointment. Repairs accepted. Young women may inquire for apprenticeship. She had barely set it down when a girl appeared in the doorway. She could not have been more than 17. Her dress was faded, and one glove had been mended with thread that did not match. She carried herself the way Celeste once had. Chin lifted because pride was sometimes the only shelter left. "I can sew a straight seam," the girl said before anyone asked. "I can sweep. I can learn. I do not need much." The shop went still, not with suspicion, but recognition. Celeste looked at the girl's hands. The nails were short, the fingertips rough. There was a tiny bandage around one thumb. "What is your name?" Celeste asked. "Marie." "Then we will write it down before we discuss anything else." The girl blinked. Celeste opened the new ledger and turned it toward her. "A name belongs on the page before the work begins." Marie stepped forward slowly, as if the room might vanish if she moved too fast. Celeste opened her mother's sewing box. The brass scissors lay inside, polished now but still scratched. The brown notebook rested beneath the tray, its torn pages kept safely with Amélie's letter. She lifted out a needle, placed it in Marie's palm, and closed the girl's fingers around it. "Start with the seam," Celeste said. "Everything worth keeping begins there." Outside, Royal Street brightened. The old sign cast a shadow across the doorway, and for the first time, that shadow did not look like something abandoned. It looked like shelter. Celeste returned to the work table. Around her, women bent over cloth, not in silence, but in concentration. Their names were written. Their wages were counted honestly. Their work went out under labels that could not be removed without leaving damage. Near the window, Amélie's blue garden hat rested beneath glass, its ribbon fold catching the light. Celeste touched the edge of her own label before sewing it into a new crown. She had not become rich in the way Victor Marchand feared or understood. She had become rooted. The world had called her disposable. The city had called the shop worthless. But when Celeste stayed long enough to listen, the place gave back what had been taken from more than one woman. A name, a room, a future, and a reason to stand. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to remember that a broken beginning does not mean a broken life.